Kourtney Jason is the president and co-founder of Pacific and Court, an award-winning Brooklyn-based book publicity and digital marketing agency. She has worked with and represented celebrities, world-renowned chefs, and best-selling authors. She has secured coverage for clients in top-tier national media that includes NBC's Today Show, The New York Times, Associated Press, People Magazine, NPR, The Wall Street Journal, among others. She's also the author of 5 nonfiction books, including Lights, Camera, Booze, Drinking Games for Your Favorite Movies, which was included in the Academy Awards swag bags. Welcome to Notes from a Ghost, a podcast about stories and the people who tell them. My name is Charlie, and I'm a ghostwriter. I love a good story. I hope you enjoy this one. Kourtney, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me today, Charlie. I'm happy to be here.
So I think a lot of people before we get into book publicity and promotion and all of that, I think a lot of people are going to be curious about movie drinking games. Can you give me a good one?
Yeah, I mean, writing that book was such a fun time. I did it with one of my best friends. So the research was quite memorable. I will say that my days of movie drinking games are currently on pause only because I'm expecting my first child. That said,
congratulations.
Thank you so much. That said, seasonally, Christmas is just around the corner. So I think Home Alone is absolutely a classic. Our suggested cocktail is a Wet Bandit. And then within, it's basically like a hurricane, a blue hurricane. It's a classic. And then in the movie, you drink anytime someone says Home Alone, anytime Kevin screams, or anytime Christmas music plays. So it is a good buzzy time. For something a little bit more 90s nostalgic, I would suggest going with Scream, which shockingly, that movie is turning 30 years old in 2026. My brain can't process that. With that movie, you will enjoy a Bloody Mary, obviously. And then you drink whenever the phone rings, anytime a horror movie is mentioned, or whenever Gail does a news report.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, my movie drinking games career is on pause one day at a time, but I have some friends I'll definitely be gifting that book to soon. God, Home Alone, I just rewatched that with my little cousins, and the rest of Thanksgiving we kept trading insults from what's Buzz, like his cousin, like, I'm gonna feed you to my tarantula.
That movie is such a classic. I still watch it with my parents every year, and it really holds up. I love it so much.
It really does. Yeah, it's incredible. I like that meme though, that you'd really wonder what his parents were doing for a living, that they could afford that kind of house and that kind of travel.
That vacation, yeah, a full family trip to Paris. Sign me up.
Was it like adults in first class, kids in coach?
It is fantastic. And, even being able to fly back as quickly just to make sure that Kevin was okay.
And I would imagine that part is actually the one thing that would be cheaper today, to get just a last minute transatlantic flight, but
true.
Wild. So I have heard you use the term breaking through the noise, and I think that's the goal for most authors when it comes to publicity and promotion. How do authors do that and get their books, the attention they deserve? I think that in my experience, we can get into feelings really quick with this because you've put so much of yourself on the page and it takes so long to write a book. And then there's just the risk, almost the guarantee that it's going to fall flat unless you really get the promotion right, is my experience.
You're right. It is a gamble, and it's probably outside of writing and taking that time to put the words to the page. It's a challenge. It is absolutely a challenge. It's a hard time for the media industry. Like, every day there's new headlines about layoffs, media layoffs, different outlets closing. So certainly in a way, the media is shrinking, but on the flip side, there's more podcasts now than we've ever had. I forget what the exact stat is, but just a couple years ago, it was like 2 million new podcasts launched in a year. Like, that's insanity. So that is a tough market. But that said, podcasts are so specifically niche that when you go on one, you know that you're speaking directly to the right audience for you. And sometimes, having a podcast that might only have, 50 or 100 listeners, but you're going to get every single one of those people to buy your book is going to be more impactful than being in the New York Times where, yeah, 1 million people might read your article, but you might only get a couple sales from that because that audience is so much wider and has such a bigger interest, bigger, value of interest. So certainly in terms of starting with the PR campaign, it always comes down to strategy and starting early. You really have to know who you are and what your message is. So I even tell our authors, like, I can polish whatever you give me, but you really have to give me those seeds of an idea that set you apart. You have to know what that is first for me to craft that and polish it to make it presentable to the media.
And I want to get into that branding side of things. I think there's so much we could unpack there, but real quick, you mentioned podcasting and we were talking about that before you got on. What's your advice for how to make the most of a podcast appearance, or maybe how to be a good guest?
Yeah, certainly do your research. So listen to previous episodes. I can't tell you how many times I've pitched our authors and the podcasters will be like, well, have you listened to an episode? And you almost feel a little bit guilty if you haven't in terms of, oh no, did they catch me? Like, I really do need to know my research. Is this author the actual right fit for this show? I don't want to waste a podcast producer or host time. I don't want to waste my author's time. I don't want to waste my time. So doing just that extra amount of research to really see what the fit is and pay attention to what their last, 10 to 20 topics were. How does yours build upon whatever they've covered previously? What's your new spin that you can offer? It's really just knowing. Even just recently, I was working with my assistant on pitches for an author that wants to talk about psychedelics. And I'm like, okay, like for me, I've worked on psychedelic books for the last 3 years. So I really understand what the sort of industry is and how can we build upon what's already been covered, how psychedelics have been growing. With this and building that pitch with my assistant, it was, okay, this is what separates her. It's bringing the corporate world to psychedelics and her section of merging those two worlds together. That's really what makes that particular client stand out.
And the thing that's really surprised me in, coming up on a year of doing this podcast is how audience size, is not the point. And like what you're saying, it's more a question of audience kind of fit and quality.
Yeah, truly. There's a podcast for everything. So we've also been working on a book about rosé wine and its growth in the industry. So my assistant took a few hours one day and just truly researched every single wine related podcast. So it's just a lot of Google search. Everything is available on Google essentially. But it really just takes the time and making sure that you're strategic with finding the right places, finding the right people, and just digging.
What you're describing about finding kind of the concepts at the root of your book, or how to think of the book or think of yourself as a brand, I don't know if that comes naturally to very many people. And it seems like there's a real art and science to that. How do you begin to approach that with an author? The branding side of things.
There certainly is an art to it, and something we encounter pretty regularly with authors is them saying, it's really hard to talk about myself. How do I do it? And oftentimes with, if an author's goal eventually is to do TV segments, which are typically 5 to 7 minutes, they're very short, they're over very fast. You have to have your messages so honed in. You can't sound memorized, but you need to be very concise and specific and thoughtful with your word choices to have that sort of impact in a 5-minute interview. So with such authors, I start them on podcasts because it's a long form interview. You really get to figure out what those key messages are. You get to test different ways to say what you're trying to say. And I think it's still important, but it's a safer, it's edited, it's a place where they can feel more comfortable to talk knowing that like, oh, I might stumble over my words, I might say here or there, but it really does help you practice and feel more comfortable to really get those messages out there.
Yeah, it's a really cool medium in that sense that you can really give someone the floor to deep dive on anything, even if it's of interest to like one listener.
Yeah, it's so true. You can go so deep. You can, in 5 minutes, it's just the headlines of what you're trying to talk about. In a 1 hour podcast, you really get to break it down to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5s of it. And especially with books, I always joke with authors, like you can't interview a book. You have to be the speaker for it. So part of what I think with campaigns too is that your book is technically secondary. Like that might sound controversial, but your book, if you know who you are and you figure out what your messages are and what you're really trying to say, your book will come up organically versus trying to make it that hard sell. And I think that's really where you'll find, more impactful opportunities and coverage and that sort of ROI on what you're doing.
And when it comes to like the other side of like talking about yourself, it seems to be is that you mentioned it there, like, people don't want to sound salesy or like they're doing a hard sell. I think a lot of people are used to the idea that it's like not polite to talk about yourself or to bring a conversation back to yourself or your work. And these are things you kind of have to do in the sort of conversations you're talking about. Do you have any advice for that kind of stage fright, social, emotional component?
Yeah, it is just getting out of your own way. You wrote a book, celebrate that. That's a big thing. And I think I'm always so excited to congratulate our authors. We do often work with first-time authors. So for me, it's such a thrill to really guide them through the process and celebrate. Like, you've written the book. That really is the hardest part. Now you just get to talk about it. You get to talk about like the whys of it. Like, why were you driven to write this? What is the impact that it's giving? What's the problem it's solving? What's the bigger conversation that it's contributing to? That should be fun. That's the celebration of it. That's the sort of present of all of this behind the scenes hard work. Like, whether it took you a year or a couple years to really write this book, now it's being able to present it to the world. And I'm always so honored to be a part of that journey for an author and really make the PR the most fun. Like for me, you mentioned that I've written a few books, like that's definitely taken more of a backseat. I really find this season of my life to like be lifting up and supporting our authors and celebrating them. And even to this day, it's such a thrill for me to share. We got the Today Show, we got a People magazine cover reveal. Like those things are huge and so impactful. And it's rewarding for me to be like, oh my gosh, my work for this author made this opportunity happen for them. But it's also like, this author knew who they were and trusted me to help them make this happen for them. So it's so collaborative. It's such a teamwork effort. But it's just, even though it's not my name being out there, like it's so rewarding and exciting to like get those incredible opportunities for them.
And I have a really like meta kind of question about this whole process, because it seems to me like there are two kinds of books that are going to have like huge hype and buzz, and I'm wondering if there's a different approach to these for these different authors. So like, let's say author one is like a celebrity and they're famous, the book is not. Like and people, the story is that they've written a book, right? And then on the other hand, you might have something like maybe one of these big idea books where the book is a smash hit and the author is maybe not unknown, but they're less famous than the book itself. Do you think there is a difference in how those two authors might approach the promotion and publicity?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, with the celebrity, they have that proven track record and they can immediately start at that A-list level media. They do not have to care about the B, C, D list level media. With an author that has, an incredible book, an incredible message that really is going to help people, you do have to start at the Z-list media and build your way up. I think about PR as a staircase. You start at the bottom and you have to work your way up, but every opportunity leads to the next one. So one of our clients, we are working on her 4th book next year. I got her on the Today Show last year. We have some incredible stuff happening for her book launch in February next year. And we really did start with like quantity over quality, but now we're getting the Today Show, we're getting Woman's World, we're getting Time Magazine, we're getting regular personal essays for her in HuffPost. So now it is a lot more quality over quantity, but she really understood and trusted the process that, yeah, if I want to be on national TV, it will take 2 to 3 years, but I know that with step by step and doing more regional media and doing smaller, more niche podcasts, that will lead her to those bigger opportunities.
And if we go back to the writing process, is there, because if there's one thing I've learned from working on proposals, it's the importance of kind of beginning with the end in mind, that you really do want to think about where this is going to find an audience. And all, we had someone on earlier to talk about book publicity, and there's that idea that it's really too late if the book already exists and now you're going to think about marketing. How might that person think about where they want to be and how they want to climb that ladder when they're actually creating the thing or coming up with the idea?
It would not to double up on your work as you're writing, but really even thinking about as you're writing a chapter. And so our company, to like clarify too, we primarily work with nonfiction. So it is a lot of, self-help, a lot of, ways to improve your life, cookbooks, etc. So I think as an author, as you're writing, like start thinking about, oh, wow, that chapter, that seems like it could be a pitch angle. Like even when you're doing interviews, you're not talking about the whole book. Narrow it down to like one chapter, and that one chapter could be, 5 or 6 different pitch angles. But that will still help you sell the overall message of the book. It's really just being more specific in terms of, the content inside. So as you're writing, really think about, okay, this is, this could come back to an interview that I talk about. This could be, repurposed as a guest essay or an op-ed. So a lot of the pitch angles that we come up with are also pulled from the book. So as we're reading the books, we're going through, the title chapters, the, subheads, subsections, and even just like, a 1-page sidebar could become a whole pitch angle where we get you like 5 different podcasts just on that one topic. So it gives, instead of just the book as the focus, it's getting into that more nitty gritty and like the more specific content that's inside it.
And it seems like if you combine that with the idea that there's, however many wine podcasts, and that you can go so niche. I'll give you an example of one I heard the other day. So Werner Herzog, the filmmaker, has a memoir out. And if you're into his movies at all, like do the audiobook because he reads it and it's spectacular. But he was recently on a hunting podcast and it's like people who source their own, meat in a sustainable way or whatever. It's basically, I think it's called Meat Eater or something. And, but it's because he did a documentary about a guy who lived with grizzly bears. And his memoir has almost nothing to do with, think it's safe to say there's almost no overlap there in genre, except that he happened to make this one movie that has a big following in the outdoor world. But the result was this super interesting podcast. And like they're getting a guest they kind of wouldn't have had on there otherwise. And then he's reaching an audience that like might not be reading, the New Yorker or places where he's being reviewed.
Yeah. And with that, to lead off of that, those are sort of the campaigns that I do find the most successful, is when there's so much overlap and we can go, okay, we can go this angle for this thing. We can go this angle for this thing, and then this angle for this thing. Like when there is more variety or like different audiences that we can target, different things that you can talk about to specific audiences, like that makes a more well-rounded, a more, built out campaign than just like, oh, we can only go down this one singular path. That is more limiting.
On ghostwriting projects and even book coaching, like the bane of my existence is when someone waits to, and it's almost like therapy where in, 50 minutes in, it's time to talk about what I really want to talk about, where someone has something that they're kind of holding on to and they bring it up as an afterthought. And it's like, oh, well, now we need to like reimagine what your book is about because this is actually super important. And I wish you had mentioned this. Is there anything that your clients tend to downplay or not think is important or not realize is important that you wish they would bring up earlier in the process or not keep to themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is a lot of digging. Like, it is a lot of us being, investigative journalists as well. So, we start with, reading the book, but we also have our authors fill out a pretty extensive author questionnaire. And that is, I just say brain dump as much as you can. If you choose to give me less content, it's going to be that much harder for me to have a successful campaign. The more that you give me gives me more to work with, more ideas to work with. So I always just tell them, like, don't think about being thoughtful. Don't think about writing this in a, perfect way. I don't care. I need you to just brain dump everything possible and just get it all out of your head so that I can then go craft a campaign around, these seeds of ideas that you might have. There's never a bad idea. It might just not be a fit, or there might not be outlets to go to for that particular idea. But I think it's so collaborative. It's so like, give me whatever is in your head and I will tell you if we can do something with it.
Is there such thing as a unmarketable book?
Oh gosh. Probably, but it hasn't come across my desk. There's been times where people have reached out and I just don't think it's the particular right project for me, but that's, I certainly have other publicists that I would recommend them to. And I think that might just be more, personality, because I want to make sure I'm the right fit for them and they're the right fit for us, because it is such a two-way road and so collaborative. And so it is an intimate relationship too. And we really care about having those sort of long-term relationships with our authors as well. I mean, I have one author that does write a book every single year, but most people don't do that. So it's like, okay, like, write a book and then I'll see you in another couple of years when you write your next book. But we do care about that longevity and having, those long-term relationships.
There's a book I'm reading right now. I think it's called Adventures in the Screen Trade. It's William Goldman, who wrote Princess Bride and like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and like 50 other things. And obviously it was written in the 80s, so some of it is dated, but he's famously the person who said nobody knows anything in Hollywood, like definitively. And that's where you end up with movies that bomb, that everyone thought were going to do great. There is, not naming any specific titles, but there's this weird phenomenon of, obviously we're living in a time when platform is everything. You kind of almost can't get a nonfiction book deal if you don't have a platform, or it's hard. And yet there have been some recent high profile books by people with like 7-figure, 8-figure followings that just fell flat and nobody read them and what have you. What is happening there? Like when something has kind of just everything going for it from a platform and marketing point of view, and then it still doesn't find its audience?
I've had that happen at one of the independent publishers I worked at. We had some pretty high profile celebrity authors. I think it really just comes down to authenticity. Like, you can write a book, but if it's not authentic or genuine, or it's truly not the right fit for your celebrity brand, yeah, it's not going to find the right audience. Like, even through like social media content creation, right? People crave authenticity. Like, we are tough critics. We can see when something's not authentic or the right fit. Like, and I've certainly seen it, whether I've worked on the project or not, like seeing XY celebrity do a cookbook and you're like, that makes no sense. I would never go to them for recipes. What are they doing? Like, they're doing it to like continue to get their name out there, but it doesn't mean it's the right step for them.
Yeah, God, that and I feel like that list is a long one.
It's true.
Now, obviously a critical moment and something people like dream about is that the launch of their book. And for anyone who's been there, there's really the lead up to that is where the magic happens. And I'd imagine that's where your job gets frantic. what's your advice for building that buzz and getting like solid pre-orders and all the kind of things you need to launch well?
Yeah. Building buzz is so important, and it certainly requires, planning and patience. So I'm sure it's, been told to your audience before, starting 4 to 6 months ahead of your release. That gives you enough time to really think about your goals, the foundation, strategize how to achieve things, and really build that timeline month by month of what do I need to do. It can also feel truly overwhelming where you're like, my book is coming out in 6 months and I have so much to do. But break it down day by day, piece by piece, and you will get there. I think it's also really important to know what success looks like for you. So we always ask our authors, even with like that sort of initial discovery call, I ask them, what are your goals? Is it building your brand? Is it book sales? Is it bringing awareness to a particular cause or topic? Or is it a combination of all of those? And it's really interesting how much that answer varies, because pretty regularly it's not sales. It's getting their name out there. It's just the attention. Like, yes, they hope that that translates to sales, but certainly there's no guarantee for that. But it is making that impact and hoping that they just help. Even just one person is important to them. So yeah, you have to figure out what success looks like, whether that is, again, media coverage, getting those pre-order sales, having really great event attendance, having, the book go viral on social media, having that sort of promotion. So really defining those goals will help you focus your efforts and accurately measure your progress.
And what's the conversation look like when those are misaligned, where someone kind of says they want one thing and then everything about how they're working and writing and building this thing indicate kind of a different goal or
Yeah, I would say that would lead to like a pretty honest conversation with our authors. Like if they had initially said their goals were this thing and then they're like, where are the sales? I would be, frank with them in a kind, considerate way, but say, hey, like that wasn't what you expressed to us before. Like we need to make sure that we're aligned on expectations. And that can be, a sort of red flag with authors. If they have unrealistic expectations, then it's, well, you're setting me up to fail, and I am going to be smart enough to frankly step away from that. Because I know I can reach their goals if they're honest and realistic with what they are.
One thing I'm curious about, like, is there a book that comes to mind where, not talking at all about the quality of the book or anything like that, but and people probably wouldn't even know this, but like where the quality of the marketing or the publicity was something that you really admire and they just knocked it out of the park?
Oh, I think you'll have to circle back to me on that. That's putting me on the spot.
I'm curious, like, I'm thinking of like, there's that saying of like, if T-shirt sales counted, like the Ramones would be like a multi-platinum band.
Yeah.
I'd be curious about, is there a book where like it just or even, I don't know, I guess another way to put that is more generically, can really good marketing and publicity make up for a book that's kind of less good?
Yes, absolutely, because sort of a publishing industry insider comment is, it doesn't actually matter if people read the book. It just matters if they bought the book, which is like so sad. And like, right, people buy books and they just sit on shelves collecting dust. Like, that's sad, but they still bought it. So for the publisher, like, that's sometimes all they care about. That's probably a horrible thing to say about an industry that I love so much, but it's true.
A recent guest I had on here, Sanibel, who's an author. I asked for some kind of hot take about shelfies and the phenomenon of sort of promoting your own reading habits on social media, or rather book buying habits. And she kind of like she didn't put it this way, but she was sort of like, it's cute that you think people actually read books. And I was like, oh shit.
It is, it can be a status symbol, right? Like, to have a beautiful bookshelf with great books, like it is decor also. Going back to sort of a interesting campaign, and this is, going to the Taylor Swift effect of things, but like her changing, there's been a lot of think pieces in the last couple weeks about her own Eras Tour book that she only gave to one retailer, Target, in stores, online, sold 814,000 copies in 2 days. That's the biggest launch of the year. She did no PR for it other than just like her own promotion. She didn't do any interviews. There were some media hits around it with like exclusives, showing different pages, talking to her fashion designers from her tour. But that is not a traditional book campaign. She didn't announce that book a year before it was coming out. She announced it a month or two ago. I went to Target the day after Thanksgiving, completely expecting, I didn't go in the morning. I went at 6 p.m. the next day, but I saw online on the Target app, it was still in stock. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go get my 4 copies and hand them out to friends as well. And she self-published, like she did not give that to a traditional publisher. That is super fascinating. My colleagues and I were like, what printer did she use? Because then we saw on Twitter that there were printing errors, and it's pretty common that books will be printed upside down. That happens. There's quality check. You hopefully find those, but it still happens. So it's just, but the book doesn't even have an ISBN. It doesn't say who printed it. Like there's so much that she didn't do in the traditional publishing model, but it's also like, okay, how does this impact other celebrity books, right? So there's a lot to sort of see with what comes from this and how it really impacts, other authors possibly going the self-publishing route.
Wow, that's that's shocking, because when I heard it was self-published, I assumed it was self-published in the same way that, because obviously that among editors and ghostwriters and book coaches is having a moment, because it's kind of the ultimate example of like, you don't need to be ashamed of self-publishing, as many business authors do. But
it's taking ownership, really. At the end of the day, it's having more professional control.
Yeah, and I think but I mean that's crazy, because one of the first things I actually love to mention the ISBN thing if I'm pitching a self-published book, because it's something that most people don't know, and it's one of those things they don't know, and it kind of is part of making the case for hiring professionals. That's very surprising, but not, I guess, at the same time.
Yeah.
It's something, I don't know that you even need to, I'd love to do the math on this, but I don't think you even need to be Taylor Swift. I mean, if I was working with an influencer who has, say, like a modest 6-figure following, I would say like you're going to make a lot more money self-publishing with 70% royalties than you would, and your book could be out in April as opposed to
right. You don't have to follow the traditional publishing timeline. Yes, you're limited on retailers, but that's what 90% of people still buy their books from Amazon. Like it's at whatever the exact stat is, but people buy books from Amazon. Support independent bookstores. We love them, and you can still like figure out how to get your book into independent bookstores, especially when it's your neighborhood. Like they care so much about supporting their own literary community that it's not that big of a hurdle that you can get over. But yeah, like you said, it's about hiring the right people too. So bringing on, if you really want a good cover, invest in a good cover designer. If you really know you care about the editing, hire a good editor, but you still maintain the rights and royalties of your, creative content.
And so I wanted to shift gears a little bit. You are an author yourself, and what does that look like? Most of us have day jobs, but yours is in the book business. How do you balance those things, and how does kind of one inform the other?
Yeah, that was a really great experience in terms of my first job, my first, step into a publishing career, working at independent publisher Ulysses Press in their PR department. I also got to sit in on the weekly acquisitions meetings, hear what books they're pitching. They're a publisher that actually works a little bit backwards compared to the traditional model. They come up with all of their book ideas in-house. then they go out and find the author to write that book. So they're tracking data. I know, it's so fascinating. And they've had this model for 20 years. They follow the data. So they're looking at what trends are emerging, and then, okay, and they work a lot faster. So typically from contract to book publication is a year. So, right now they're certainly looking for their fall and winter 2025, 2026 titles. So they're predicting trends for next year and signing authors that are sort of already talking about that in that world. So they're still finding really credentialed experts to write these books. And these authors are people that, might have thought about writing a book, but just didn't think they're ready. And then here shows up an editor in your inbox saying, hey, I'd like to actually give you a book deal. You feel qualified to write this book that we have in mind. So it's a super interesting business model. Getting to sit in on those meetings and having a background as a pop culture journalist, I would get to, hey, that's a pop culture book. I'd like to throw my hat into the ring for that. And then, write a sample chapter, do a little bit of an outline and then get signed on to write those projects. So that was super exciting. I wrote about 5 books in 5 years. I haven't written a book in 10 years now. So I feel like, okay, I might need to change that again. I still work with Ulysses Press pretty closely. They're one of our clients. So yeah, I haven't written a book in a while, but I do think having been an author and seen what it's like to try to get PR for your book and to practice being on the other side of interviews really informs me on how to be a better publicist and really understand what it is like as an author and what support or guidance or, advice that they might need to feel more comfortable to speak.
And that brings up a question I thought about right before we got on. This came up in a podcast that hasn't gone live yet, but I just love this question so much. I'm going to just start including it with everybody. And that is to the point of speculative book projects. What is a book that you're not going to write, but you wish someone would write that is not out there?
Oh, gosh. I mean, I do have my own sort of ideas. I did a podcast about this a couple months ago. I had a stalker experience in college, and I really think it should be I want to try to turn that into a thriller fiction because it has just the most insane twisting. But I'm not a novelist. I'm not a fiction writer, so I would certainly need someone's help to put that scene into fiction.
Yeah, I would imagine. And that seems to be having kind of a moment with some stuff that's on Netflix right now. And
yeah, Baby Reindeer.
Right, which I still haven't seen. And it's one of those, yeah, and people are talking about it how have you not seen that?
Yeah, it's so good. It's heavy. It's dark. But there was a lot of oh, yeah, I know exactly what's going to happen because it happened to me.
Yeah, that's actually something, because one theme in this podcast has been kind of really intense experiences that people have made it through and come out the other side and can kind of speak to the story at the heart of it. And that's actually something I would love to do an episode on, because it's from what I've seen of it, such a harm. It's such a just devastating and exhausting thing to go through.
It is. It's very unnerving, and you lose a lot of your trust in other people because especially when it's someone that it's very just unsettling. In terms of just I mean, so many books that are out there are also born from people's trauma, and it's a way for them to process their own trauma. It's a way for them to work through it, to get to the other side, to find healing, but then to help other people too. That's the importance of all of us telling our stories in, any sort of medium or platform that exists. Something here I say today will hopefully help an author on their journey, or, all of that to say, everyone's story has importance and it will help someone if you're able to get it out there.
I like that question so much better than there's this, and it's so done to death in the sort of prescriptive nonfiction self-help world of the what is your why. I so much prefer the who is it you're trying to help. That's
great.
So looking at the year ahead, I think this is going to come out the first week of 2025, this episode.
Fantastic. I'll be working on my vision board and manifesting for my year.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, what are you excited for this year, and in terms of your own work, and then kind of more broadly in publishing and in books?
Yeah, well, first, personally, growing my family. My baby is due in June, so that'll be very exciting. And that also means like a perfect time for maternity leave with the summer. So I'm very excited about that. Professionally, we have some really great authors that we've worked with for a long time, publishing really important and timely books next year. And also with taking maternity leave, I think it'll be a really big professional growth for me to like actually step away from my company. I've been running this company we're hitting our fourth year, going into our fifth year. So really being able to actually like take a step back and sort of see how it functions without me in the day to day is, trusting that I've built something that has foundation without me, and really getting to see my team, grow and thrive, sort of on their own, and trusting that I really am excited to see them shine, without me just sitting here over them.
Very cool. Well, yeah, congratulations again. I mean, that's so exciting.
Thank you so much.
And anyway, the summer is a quiet time in books, from what I've experienced.
It worked out quite well, coincidentally.
Now, is the other kind of question that I love to ask on the show, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you were hoping to talk about?
Oh, gosh. I think for authors, don't be afraid to ask for help. I mean, we are open even just for consultations. I truly understand that hiring a book publicity firm is a cost. It's an expense. And we very much value the authors that are paying us their hard-earned money. Like, that is not forgotten when we're working day to day. But we're even open for consultations if you just need advice on how to draft a press release or, understand what those messages are within your book. Anything that you need, we can even just have a quick consultation, a 30-minute call, and we are happy to just help people, really succeed in what they're doing.
Sweet. Well, I hope it's a great year for you and for publishing. And
thank you so much.
Thanks for talking to me.
Thanks so much for having me.
Where can people find you and work with you if they have a book to promote?
Yeah, our website is pacificandcourt.com, and the "and" is spelled out. We're on most social media platforms at Pacific and Court. I'm on LinkedIn, Kourtney Jason, Kourtney with a K, and really hope to, hear from you all in my inbox.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kourtney.
Thanks, Charlie.
If you have an epic story, I'd love to hear it. You can find me at dailyprose.com or on LinkedIn. My links and Kourtney's are in the show notes. Thanks for listening.